All right. So last week we did discuss a little bit on this concept of what is this higher self? How do we really understand? Like I said, I'm all these recordings are on my YouTube channel. You can always go back and review what we have discussed. So, is a very important statement here. What you identify with reveals itself in your personality. So, if you see that way, all our personality, all our life, how we perceive, how we are looking at it, depends on what we identify with. So, like I said in the beginning of this mind region, it's the spiritual practice is all about identifying that real self. So, once we realize that essence within, the godliness within, slowly our personality transforms into this higher being, means we become one with it. We start identifying with it. So, in spiritual terms, true devotion means one is identifying with it. So, I often use the metaphor of coconuts and mangoes to explain the idea of identity and personality. Some people identify themselves with their body, strength, wealth, or expertise on subject. I'm so strong. I work out harder than anyone else. I know the subject best. My house is the biggest, and so on. Such identification falls in the bucket of coconuts, meaning such people have an ego that is dense and overbearing in its outward expression. See, this we already established this idea that it is the ego which identifies with. Even to identify with the divine in the beginning, even in the growing phase, that ego is very much necessary. But once we move into this mind region, as we discussed, now the ego is getting refined, it's becoming subtler and subtler. It is sort of reaching this real state. But even to identify the divine, we need that ego. Without ego, there is no identification. But it's a process, right? So, this self we are talking about, like the Bible says, the man is made in the image of God. The reason the man is given the capacity to identify itself with this essence, that's why it's the image of the God. Otherwise, I mean, everything is an image of the God. Everything is created from it. That's higher self, right? So, if the God has created this universe as we believe, or this existence, his essence must be there. So, no one is devoid of that essence. But only thing is, we have not identified it with that essence. So, that's why the initial identification that me and God as two separate entities, it begins like that. But slowly it turns inwards and we try to identify that godly essence within. So that's the whole idea of spirituality, correct? So the ego initially identifying it with its external possessions. The external possessions first begins with the body. Like when you talk to these toddlers, when they're growing, they'll say their name and then they say, oh, John likes this, Bob like this, like that, right? And slowly, because They talk as if they are the third person. Means they're sort of not recognized, this ego has not recognized that John is their own name. Slowly the transformation happens. They identify with themselves. So they talk about themselves as the first person. So initially they talk themselves as a second person. So same thing if you apply, we see God as a second person. Slowly when we mature in spirituality, when this identification of the self, the real self begins, it becomes one. So we identify with the divine essence and we speak from that essence. We work from that essence. Correct? So that's the whole idea. So no one is devoid of that essence. Everyone has it. But the human, you can say intelligence, human consciousness, human ego has the ability to identify. It has this possibility to identify. And then there are ripe mangoes. Such people identify with softer aspects of themselves. But how much ever even the softer or harder, they are still the external elements. At the most, we can go to the level of causal body. So, what is beyond causal? How do you identify the self beyond causal? So that's when, as we move into the higher regions, so even this aspect of softness, hardness, everything drops off. So, what's important to understand is that the egoism is a consequence of moving away from the feeling that everything is of the source. As a feeling that the entire existence is one takes a root in the heart. So, the separation begins to dissolve, starting with the feeling I am part of this existence. Those who have seen Avatar movie, it is very much reflected, this concept. We are all one existence. The life force which is flowing in us is the same life force. The consciousness, it's all collective consciousness. There is no single consciousness. There's nothing called my consciousness. It's a collective consciousness influencing each other, right? So that's why when we recognize this collective consciousness, our prayers will shift from individual to the universe. I cannot pray no longer for this individual identity because this identity expands into universal identity. When it expands into universal identity, I cannot just pray for myself because praying for myself is not going to help when the entire consciousness is collective, it's one consciousness. Every individual, through their thoughts, through their actions, is impacting this bigger pole. And the ripples, everyone feels it. So that's why there is a need, innate need for all of us to grow in this path. I should not say in this path of the essence, identification with the essence, right? So in whichever the medium or the means people choose, whether they choose a religion, whether they choose different spiritual systems, but all of them, the end goal is the same. One is to bring harmony in this collective consciousness. Unless there is harmony in the collective consciousness, there is no peace in this world. There is no growth also. Individuals, if I am growing individually as a spiritual entity, it's not going to help anyone. So that's why we need to bring this harmony in the collective consciousness as well. So that's why as this identification is changing, to a universal state. So from an individual state, now I am kind of connected to this entire universe. So then I start impacting this collective consciousness more effectively. So something to think about, right? So which we all into, we all belong to the same and culminating. We are all one. See? So the later realization sublimate ego in one go. So when I part of the collective consciousness, what is my identity? It becomes a universal identity. So that's when I begin to become selfless. Okay, the spectrum of ego and its role. So when it comes to spirituality, this term spectrum very seldom used in spiritual literature because it's even the consciousness is a spectrum. When I say lower consciousness, higher consciousness, it's like the ocean in front of me, ocean near the shores. As we move towards the center of the ocean, the phase, the state of the ocean is changing. So recently I discovered something, this is tsunami due to the earthquake in Russia which triggered a tsunami. So some of my close relatives are on a cruise. So I was worried about them. So I did some research. Then I recognized that when the if a tsunami is hitting, if the tsunami warning is there, all the cruise ships were moved into the middle of the ocean because the waves of tsunami go under the ocean. So if you go to the middle of the ocean, they are the under. At the shores, they hit the shores very hard. So only the shores are affected, not the middle of the ocean. Something for me to learn about, right? The same thing, it's the same water here and there. So the lower consciousness is the same consciousness as the higher consciousness. There is no different consciousness. It's one consciousness experiencing different states. Maybe in our next session, I'll explain a little bit about the consciousness, right? This is how consciousness is responsible for all this creation. So the interplay between your soul and the source can be described as a space outside the room and the space inside the room. So how would you describe the space if the walls were removed and inside and outside no longer existed? It's like you can also take another example, the balloon. The air is in the balloon and air is outside the balloon. When the balloon bursts, the air in the balloon and outside the air is the same. It merges, it becomes one. So when these walls are the barriers, and the ego is identifying itself within these barriers, right? So during meditation, you enter into deeper and deeper levels of samadhi or the original state, becoming absorbed in its depths. So each time you surface, your consciousness returns with an incremental awareness of your higher self. So this samadhi, original state from where, the life emerged, life came into existence. That means it's in the seed form. So the seed form is with all the potentiality. Once the seed form comes into existence, its potentiality seems to, spread out. Or you can say that effect is reduced. So that's why when we go into the seed form means the original state. In the uh, in the literature, In the scriptures, it is called the Prakriti. Prakriti means this Prakriti people think of as this nature is which is what we see in existence. But the real meaning of Prakriti is pra means before, kriti before it came into existence. So the Prakriti, what nature is really referring to, the real potent, it's which is in the before existence, in the seed form. So that reaching that state is samadhi. You got it? So samadhi is only a beginning state. There are many states beyond Prakriti, meaning what is that which existed even before? I don't know if you have heard this Roger Penrose. He will talk about what was before Big Bang. So we talk as if there is no existence before Big Bang, but there is something which which kind of created a situation of Big Bang. So that's why as we go deeper and deeper, all this information is encoded into that consciousness. It's just that we are bringing it out into our lives, bringing it out into our true identification. Correct? A lot of people do this practice. Who am I? Who am I? They keep asking, who am I? How much ever you ask, who am I? The ego will only respond to what you identify with. That's why meditation becomes an aid, a tool, a means for us to identify the real essence within, because through meditation we can touch those states. So over time, your awareness can reach the level of soul consciousness when only the barest identities of the source and the soul remain. So this state represents a threshold that can never be crossed as long as the soul retains its ego awareness. So when the ego awareness is lost, the difference between the source and the individual source are resolved. The ego awareness can be only lost when the barriers in which the ego is identifying is dissolved. So these barriers in a technical terms from the scriptures are called the koshas. So this is a multi-dimensional barriers. In one aspect, if you look at it, we talk about the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body. Whenever you say a body, think of it as covering. And within these bodies, there are different, another perspective is identifies are the five koshas, five layers. So when as these layers dissolve, a body layer dissolving doesn't mean I'm dead. It only means the ego has transcended its identification. So as it transcends each identification, when the final wall is removed, it's like the balloon, air inside and outside becomes one. When there is no barrier, the ego, there's nothing for ego to identify. It becomes a pure awareness. So then the consciousness also have no, the spectrum of consciousness is changing. So the spectrum of consciousness awareness is also transcending along with the ego awareness. Yes, Cliff, you have a question? Cliff, you have a question? You are mute. You can unmute yourself.
I said, then if you dissolve the barrier between your ego and the universe, it's almost like you pop the balloon. There's no more balloon. The air in the balloon
Yes.
has become one with the room.
Correct.
Then what becomes of you?
That's why we are talking about the spectrum. So what becomes of me is now I have accessed my consciousness, awareness spectrum is changed from into infinity. That means depending on what I want to do, the spectrum adjusts itself. Just because my awareness has gone beyond doesn't mean I'll stop identifying a person or myself. If my name is Srikant, even after that layers are removed, I identify this physical body as Srikant.
Well, does anyone
Okay, but
does
it's a
anyone achieve
spectrum.
that? Does anyone really achieve that state?
All of us have achieved it already. Why I am saying all of us? See, now our spectrum is expanding. But see, this is exactly, like I gave this example last time also. Suppose I have $1 million. That means my capacity to acquire something which is worth $1 million, right? Suppose I go to buy a candy from a store. If the candy is $1, just because I am have $1 million, I'm not going to spend all the $1 million on a candy. I'll still pay $1, right? So the spectrum adjusts according to what I want to become aware of. If I want to become aware of this computer, then my consciousness is adjusting to it. But when I go into this meditation state, I'm able to identify myself with that samadhi. So each one who is meditating, I've already identified that samadhi state at one time or the other. The moment you identify that state, that becomes your spectrum. So that's why the spectrum, that's why we're talking in terms of spectrum. We are not talking in terms of one definitive state. Now, my spectrum is expanding. That is what the expansion of the consciousness really means. But it is already there. But to an extent I traveled is what where my spectrum is. Do I does it make sense?
Yes, but I guess then the question is, let us say you finally breach this barrier.
Right.
Well, what is beyond beyond? Or is one space different than another, or is it like all the same? Like if you would travel between here and the edge of our galaxy, it's still space, right? Maybe the scenery changes, but it's
Right.
still space.
But see, the edge of the galaxy is still it's a dimension. We are in a spatial dimension. So that's why you understand this. All existence, physical existence, galaxies, multi-universes, however you want to term it, they're all in one spectrum, one state of spectrum. To become aware of, looking at the moon on telescope doesn't mean my spectrum has increased. Only my physical ability to see an object which is far away has increased. That's it. You cannot even say my spectrum has increased in a physical plane. So it's all existence, whatever we are talking. So we are only talking at a physical plane, at the most, at a mental plane, right? Now every meditation takes us beyond the mental plane. So the subtleties we experience, we still again bring it back to the mental plane, but slowly we understand those subtleties at that plane itself. Then then that this language makes sense because we kind of want to constrain ourselves, explain everything within the mental and physical plane. Then the language becomes very difficult. So it's a spectrum. We all have experienced it. The moment we receive the transmission as part of this meditation, that experience, that spectrum is always, the limits are getting pushed. We know it at certain level, intuitively we know it, but we don't know how to use that spectrum into the normal life, mundane life, because the spectrum gets adjust itself. That's why the recommendation from the teachers is to even to work, even the mundane things we attend to that from that meditative state. What is, lack of a better word, it is called meditative state. So we have to connect with that state and work. Otherwise, there is the language. I mean, we already crossed the barriers of the language to explain it. That's why again we have to bring it down to a physical example, like the candy example I am giving, right? So the $1 million is the conscious spectrum. So to understand this table, I don't need the higher spectrum. To become aware of this table, I don't need higher spectrum. Okay. But I'm glad you brought it up, Cliff. So that's why I like this word spectrum here. So this state represents a threshold that can never be crossed as long as the soul retains its ego awareness. So when ego awareness is lost, the difference between the source and the individual souls are resolved. So at this most refined state, ego continues your basic identity because it has to survive. The basic identity is always kept, but the access for that ego spectrum identity has changed. So in this state, ego is humility personified. It's again humility and all this are to say that the ego has become very sublime. But humility is still a quality of it's a mental construct. So we are going beyond the mental construct. Okay. So I'll stop here. So any comments, questions?
Yes, Srikant, brother, I have one question. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that actually when you are in the meditative state, you will know, yeah, I think the state and who you are, actually, all those things, right?
Uh-huh.
Um, it means in certain, reach the position. But what exactly we are going to achieve, right? Let's say that actually you realize that this is my, previous state, right? And this is my future state, right? But you are still actually has to perform your day-to-day karmas. And what kind of actually, I think what you I think basically alter your work, right?
Yeah, see, you are basically asking from a psychological aspect of life,
Mm-hmm.
right? We are talking about transcending the psychological aspects of life. Because, see, when in from a mental psychological state, the mind is always thinking in terms of a transaction. And
Mm-hmm.
also, the mind is thinking in terms of the present, past, and future.
Correct.
So, from an above dimension, the present, past, and future sort of loses its value, means the mind loses its transactional state. So, when it loses its transactional state, what happens is whatever the work it is getting into, whatever the daily activities it is getting into, it starts from a very neutral perspective. So the anxiety is already dropped from a psychological aspect
Mm-hmm.
of getting the work done. At the same time, because now you are connected to this universal consciousness, you see the value of the work you are doing. That means you are always thinking in terms of the value you can bring to this life. Okay, so that's why your motivation, your driver from a success to the value, it changes from a success to the value. You see the difference there, right? Success is very transactional. Value is for the universal good. So in every work you do, you look at that aspect. That means your selfishness is dropping. Imagine when selfishness is dropping from a human being, how the personality behavior of that human being changes. So these are all the psychological benefits we are talking about. Still, your spectrum is a different level. So what good it brings to me from that spectrum itself is because now your identification has changed. You have become an universally identified individual, or that
Okay.
individuality is lost. So think what value you can bring to this life. Okay. So I'll stop here and then we'll get into meditation.